Recently, on the HR Besties podcast that I co-host, we had an episode called HR for HR. And the conversation went like this.
Who takes care of HR when HR has a problem?
That's what HR for HR is, right?
Let's say I am HR, I report to the CHRO, and I have an issue with the CHRO. Who do I go to?
You go to God, girl.
That clip has now been viewed millions of times, and it's really resonated with a lot of people. And in the episode, we talk about options HR can take if you do have a conflict with the Chief Human Resources Officer or someone else above you in the corporate ladder. But in this video, I wanted to speak not just to HR, but also to managers and employees about what you do if you have conflict at work and some of the options that you can take. In this video, I'll talk about 5 different options, and I'll run through them quickly, to think about what you might be able to do, depending on your organization and your situation. Now, whenever you're in a situation about conflict, you have to decide what you can do and what you want to do, because when you're working with people, nothing's ever guaranteed. But you get to choose what you do. And so the first is whether you can talk to that individual. And again, if you have issues with someone such that you're looking for resources about how to deal with them, it may be a situation where you don't feel comfortable talking to them directly or feel like you can do anything. But at times, especially if a conflict has just started out, it can be an approach to talk to that person. And especially if you're junior to them, you may think, well, why is this my job? And at times, you have to decide what you're going to do based on your own career and your own situations. And sometimes that may mean making the decisions that those senior to you should be making and not putting you in that situation in the first place. But thinking about how you can meet them where they are. And so often I hear situations of, I have a boss and I feel like they assume the worst in me, or a boss and I made a mistake and they're just holding it against me. And so sometimes it's thinking about that boss or that individual and what kind of pressures they may have and why they may be taking those out on you. And again, it's a whole nother situation if someone is acting inappropriately or individually against you. But if you're in a situation and you feel this way, thinking about, okay, is this pressure that they're getting, and is it a conversation I want to have with them directly? And so sometimes it may be talking to them and candidly saying, I didn't know how to talk about this, but I sometimes feel like you think the worst in me and I'm trying to do the job successfully. And so I just wanted to talk about that rather than keep that inside and not say anything about it. Again, that's some words that you can say if you feel like you can have that conversation. And there may be those bosses or leaders who hear that and they don't realize how whatever's been going on may have affected them and the way that they treat you. There may be those other leaders that you're like, I would never have that conversation with the person. But sometimes it is leveling with that person in the way that you can, again, meeting them where they are and saying, like, I know that you're likely under, a lot of pressures from your bosses as well, but I wanted to have that conversation. 2 is, if you don't feel comfortable talking to that individual, often with organizations, you'll have resources, including in a handbook of who to talk to. That might mean HR. Sometimes handbooks will have an open door policy, so you can talk to any manager. They'll have specific individuals identified. But know that when you talk to those individuals, it's important to know what's going to happen in that conversation. And so sometimes it may be talking to that individual and saying, as I talk to you, are there things I should know about our conversation? Because what people may not realize is if you go to HR, to a manager and say, I don't want to make a formal complaint, I just want to talk about it. Well, there may be situations where HR or a manager has to do something about it. That's the obligation on them. And so understanding in those situations what the outcome's going to be. And so just talking and saying, if I talk to you about something, can I just talk it through? Or is it something that you then have to address it? And they may say, it depends. And they want you and to encourage you to report it. But that's one area where I often see people talk about HR in particular, that they, report something to HR, and then all of a sudden they're hearing from other people and they didn't realize that it was going to be a whole process. That's one thing that's really important for HR and managers to know about what is your obligation and making sure that you're communicating that if people are bringing concerns to you, of telling them at least whom they might hear from next, even if you don't know what that path's going to look like. But so it's not a surprise if you do have to look into something which can feel really formal to individuals. But when you do have that, knowing what kind of resources they are, again, that handbook can be helpful. 3 is an Ombudsman program. Now, if you haven't experienced one of these, you're not alone. In my experience, they're not that common, especially in U.S. organizations. But often an ombudsman program is structured as really a neutral source. So as I talked about, HR, managers, or you may even have like board of directors, executives listed as people that you can go to report concerns. Frequently, those individuals have to do something with the information. But an ombudsman program is structured differently. So really, that's a confidential resource that, aside from exceptions that I've certainly seen from like health, danger to safety and health, other than those very narrow exceptions, that there isn't a reporting obligation, and it really is set up as that confidential source. So they won't do anything about it unless you give them explicit permission. And why I think that can be helpful is because that really gives that opportunity for individuals to talk things out and decide about what they want to do. And that ombudsman has the experience. Often they've had a robust career and they have significant training. And so they're often part of the organization, but they could be a third party. But that's someone that you talk to that is able to talk through, give advice, give tips, but is that confidential source. And so an ombudsman can be a really strong resource for organizations to have. And if you don't have anything like this, looking into setting that up, because that can be that channel in addition to the others that you may have that just by their very nature can't be that kind of confidential advice giver. So that's an ombudsman program. Fourth, which is more common, is an EAP, or Employee Assistance Program. And this is especially in the US. And what an EAP is it's a program that's like a third-party benefit. But generally the way that these are set up is that, unlike medical benefits, which in the US you generally have to sign up, pay your premium, that an EAP, if an organization has that, then you don't have to sign up for it. Even if you decline all of the benefits, generally, and this it always depends on the terms of it, but generally for an EAP, you have free access to it. The company or the organization pays 100% of the cost. And you're eligible, and your spouse and dependents are eligible. And what that can look like can be free therapy, free counseling, sometimes free legal services, free financial counseling services. It really can depend on what those look like, but really having that therapy and that counseling. And the gap with EAPs is that a significant number of organizations have them, but only generally the usage is about 4% of individuals who have access to them actually use them. And so that's one thing that as a manager, I've talked about and trumpeted people using and gone through it so that I can talk about what that experience is like. And they have all sorts of questions, like Q&A, like the AP questionnaires will generally say, is this confidential? And employers generally can't see the usage. They don't know who's using it. They only have the statistics about amounts. They don't know what subjects. And again, while all that depends on the benefit plan, an EAP can be a really helpful way for anybody from a junior employee to senior level leaders to use that, to have that outlet where you can get that professional advice and medical treatment, mental health treatment for you and for your dependents. And so that's one resource that can be really helpful that organizations really need to talk about using so that individuals have that level of trust with it. And the fifth, I'll say, is having things like a mentor or your work friends, people that you can rely on. It's why relationships in the workplace can be so helpful and so important. And so for organizations establishing formal mentorship programs, to have that, so it's someone ideally outside of your chain of command, your supervisory, but someone that can give you that kind of feedback. So if you're having an issue with your boss or with anybody else at work, you can go to that mentor to give those level of tips. What should I do in this situation? So having those sorts of programs can have a lot of help for people to get a sense of day-to-day, get that advice and feedback, but especially hearing from someone who may have advice on a particular situation. And so having those formal mentorship programs. But even if you don't have that, because a lot of organizations don't have that formalized, but having people that you can talk with at work and having, whether it's truly your kind of work best friend, having those resources, but that's where those people, and being able to lean on those people and have those levels of trust of saying, what do I do in this situation, can be really helpful at work when, especially if you're remote or hybrid and aren't having as much in-person interaction, but to be able to build that and have that person that you can trust. So overall, even though in the episode we have that clip that definitely got a lot of attention, it's important to know what resources that are out there. So in looking through your handbook, seeing what you have, do you have an EAP? Is there a mentorship program that you can be part of? Or for individuals, for an open door policy? What's HR managers' roles? That can include things, again, like board of directors, executives. But knowing that sometimes, even as you rise in the corporate ladder, you may have more of those challenges and feel less willing or able to be able to raise those to people. But that level of support is needed for everyone. So having resources of people that you can go to and have those conversations, and whether it's talking to that individual directly or using that type of EAP program. So I hope this is helpful to give some of those ideas, and so that when you have those challenges, you can think about what those resources are and even be that person for people that you work with or that are in your life who need some of that support on their end as well.